Good evening, everyone. This is Tuesday, November 1st, meeting of the School District of Waukesha Board of Education Teaching and Learning Committee. First item of business is verification that the meeting has been properly posted.
It has.
Thank you very much. And Mrs. Kozlowski is excused for tonight. The next item is approval of the minutes from the October 4th meeting. Any questions or modifications? Mr. Como?
I move approval as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Moore. All in favor say aye. Aye. 4-0. Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is it the action next or?
Yes, for level one.
Okay, thought maybe that was out of order with the public comments.
Yeah, let's do that.
Would everyone support just a courtesy modification to the agenda so we can do public comments first? Okay, thank you. All right. So this is the section of our meeting where there's an opportunity for citizens to speak. We have one speaker tonight who will be allowed up to 5 minutes. They will be notified at 3 minutes that they should begin to complete their comments. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and this committee does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in respectful and productive ways and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used in the area behind the speaker, and podium should be clear during public comment. And also, to respect our speaker and our meeting participants, please silence your cell phones at this time. Our speaker tonight is Mr. Reese.
Good evening. Tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about environmental science. It's on the agenda tonight, and I want to share the way I perceive things when I come here and what I've heard listening to the video is you get a very whitewashed version of it. You get a very at ease, flowers and butterflies and this kind of stuff. But when you get into the meats and potatoes of it, when I was even in elementary school and they were building the Alaskan pipeline, I was told that was going to kill all the caribou. That was going to be the end of the caribou if that was built. And when I raised my hand and challenged it and said, no, wait, I see deer going underneath things all the time, I was told that people like me were going to be the death of the caribou. So when they talk about environmental science and we get into these things, there's a lot of things that are left out from what we hear here. In the 1970s, the early 1970s, there was an article written in the New York Times called The Coming Ice Age. And I've read the article before. And the thing is, if you take the article and you read it, and you replace ice age with warming, even though the causes are different, the effect is the same. How can that be with two totally different things? Yet they have the same effect, unless there's an agenda here. So when you talk about carbon dioxide being one of them that they say is a cause of global warming, methane, the other one. But carbon dioxide just doesn't appear from nowhere. Everything exists, and everything has always existed. If it's in coal, that means it was alive one time. They say it's a fossil fuel. And if it was alive one time, it had to grab that carbon from somewhere. So that carbon has always existed and always did exist. And it had to exist for it to get there as a gas. So it can't be a pollutant. It had to be here. And it was a very robust time in plant life. I mean, a coal vein is 4 feet thick or somewhere around there, and it's compressed. And so all of that had to come from somewhere, and it was once alive, and it was once breathing material that took in carbon and gave off oxygen, and we're just reversing the process. But it's all the same. So that's not talked about in when we talk about environmental science. Those things aren't touched on, that it all comes from the same thing. And the other thing is, what are the alternatives? Where did we come from before we burned fossil fuels? What was it like when we plowed fields with horses? You know, a long time ago, they keep saying how we use less land today to farm than we did years ago. You know, and 100 years ago or more, we use less land. Why is that? Because a lot of that land had to go to feed the horses. They took up a big percentage of it. And a horse is a lot like a human being when it comes to plowing a field. I used to live up north, and I've sat and watched Amish plow fields. And it's pretty inspiring how it's done. Because you don't get on a horse, behind a horse, and say, giddy up, go. You'll kill the horse. You cannot run a marathon every day.
2 minutes.
So you would kill that horse if you tried to do that. So it has to be done over a long period of time in order to do this. They make a lap, they cool the horse down, they water it, and you have tree lines that go through fields. Those tree lines were allowed to be there to provide shade for these horses, so that they could sit in shade. They'd have to rest. You cannot just drive something like that. So by doing this, we become more industrious and we feed more people using less land, actually being cleaner, using less land to provide for more people. Also, the towns were filthy. There was horse manure everywhere and cow manure everywhere. It was a filthy time. And people heated their homes with raw coal. It was a filthy time. The Thames River was dead for thousands of years before the Industrial Revolution because there was no way of doing things other than dumping things. You had no industrial ability to move things away. You had to use the river and dump things in there. We are a much cleaner society because of the Industrial Revolution. We're not in spite of it. And if clean fuel was what the goal was, where's the hydroelectric? Why do we not push for hydroelectric? China built the largest dam about 20 years ago. They built the Three Gorge Dam. They can do it. We've done it before. It's a great way to store energy. And that's what it's all about, is storing energy.
30
and a way to
seconds.
do it that we can use it on demand. So anyways, we're out of time. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Now, on to our action items. So we do have a couple of field trip requests tonight. Mrs. Landish, is there anyone in particular that you want us to start with?
Yes, so we do have our music department here. Our EHE rep is not here, so we
Okay.
would like to start with them if possible. And again, just if you could be available at the podium if the board has any questions, certainly. And again, as presented, Dr. Piasek, you can either take the motion separate or as a group, however the board chooses.
Okay. So I know everybody's had a chance to look at the requests, and they've been approved at the school level. The first one is a request, and we had some preliminary discussion just about how this overlaps the potential spring break, since the 2024 calendar has not been decided yet. Maybe the chaperones could just share a little bit about that strategy, so we understand what that means in terms of school days missed.
Sure, yeah, okay. Yeah, we looked at the previous calendars, knowing that, the spring break has typically been that last week of March. Next year is kind of an odd year, I guess, in that Easter actually will fall during that last week of March. So when we came up with the proposal, we were making that assumption that spring break would be that last week. And so we actually looked to have our trip start 2 days early so we wouldn't run into Holy Week and Easter for our students. And Mr. Pat did approve that option as well, just so that it's, staying out of that time frame for the families. Of course, if spring break's a different date or anything, we have the ability to make changes to the schedule.
Thank you. Is that feasible if something changes with the schedule, that the trip could actually be changed at that point?
Yep, it's
Okay.
very fluid right now.
Okay. Any questions? Any other questions? Mr. Coleman?
Just a comment. These are the types of experiences that have lifelong memories, right? And maybe even opportunity for employment, as you point out, in your description here. And these are fantastic opportunities for students, and I am so happy that we continue to offer these types of things for our students. And I know my children have been in band and/or orchestra, and they still talk about some of those things to this day, whether they be some of the things in the class or some of the trips that they had a chance to go on. It was actually one of the first international trips. My daughter Laura went to China for band. Now, that is a lot more complex these days, international travel, as you know, and we've discussed here. But opportunities here in the United States are abundant, and I'm really glad that you are looking forward to leading this if we move forward with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moore?
Thank you. I will second that what Mr. Como said. I am very excited to see this happen. If approved, then again, I want to wish you all the best. And it's these experiences that where our students are able to learn and engage even more. So please let us know if it is approved, what we can do as a board to support any additional requests that you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, why don't we just take this one separately, be looking for a motion to approve the California music trip as presented.
Sure, I will move approval as presented.
By Mr. Como,
I second.
seconded by Mr. Moore. I don't anticipate any more discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That'll be 4-0.
Great,
Have
thank
fun.
you. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
I feel like I'm supposed to say, what are you going to do next? All right, have a good night. The next field trip request was on behalf of eAchieve for Washington DC and New York. That's a summertime trip. No days of school would be missed, about 30 kiddos. I didn't have any additional questions with this one. Anybody else have questions or concerns about that one? Okay. Do you have a motion?
Yes, I would move approval of the DC field trip as presented.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Moore. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? 4-0. All right, thank you. All right, moving on to the next item in general business, we have a technology update to talk about the applications on our student iPads.
That is me, thank you. So this came at the request of Kara Kozlowski. I know she's not here tonight, but she did, we have been in contact, so she's aware of the process around the update and has given feedback around this. But for everyone else, the suggestion was made that the administration take a look at our overall app inventory, and we have found out through this process of the inventory that we have just over 400 apps that have accumulated, I would say, across our system over the past 10 years. And so with that said, it was an absolute prime time to take a look to see what continues to be relevant, what continues to be not used, and so we are in the middle of that process currently. So the attachment that I gave to you all and what the public can see currently are the 72 apps that in essence have been earmarked teaching and learning. And how this process has occurred over the past 10 years is that usually the ITC team, in collaboration with either school principals, student services, and/or teaching and learning, would approve anyone bringing forth an app that could be, in essence, onboarded in the system. So those 72 apps, reflect those years of submissions over time. So with that said, the key in how you read the spreadsheet, so thank you for asking, Mr. Como. I was going to review that for everybody so they can see. We're on a simple green, yellow, red system. So the app spreadsheet represents the green. If they're currently marked green, those are the apps that are being kept in the system. If they're yellow, they're apps that are still under review by the team. And then if they're red, that means currently the decision has been made to sunset that app by the end of the school year. So that's the process that we're currently under in teaching and learning. We've started there. Once we're done with that process, and we currently have only 16 of the 72 that are still in review. Part of that is us determining not just usage, but again, what usage, meaning how many users are currently accessing the app, but at what schools, and whether or not we need it for like the Tier 1 instruction or if it's a supplemental resource. So with that said, we are closing in on being complete with that 72 app teaching and learning process. We are then going to move on to student services next. So Dr. Cook and his team will be reviewing in the same way that we have, using the green, yellow, red process. And then the third part of the process is that we are going to be collaborating with the school principals, because that was the third group that the schools onboarded a specific app for their school at that time. And so we are going to collaborate with them, teaching and learning, having the final, in essence, sign off as to whether or not they stay or they go. In terms of the sunsetting process, we plan to communicate. Actually, we're talking about what an ideal communication plan might be. I think some of that depends on current usage. We had an experience this summer with an app going away, and with anything, when something goes away, some people just aren't happy with that, certainly. So we have to keep in mind our communication plan. We want to be transparent and allow them to know that the resource is not there, but also make them aware of the other plethora of resources that we do have available on the student iPads for the students. One thing I would like to show you then as part of that process, and then I'll certainly open it up for questions here. I'm going to screen mirror what our ITC team has been working towards then for the final product. So, as I mentioned, this past month has been the teaching and learning review. I would guesstimate by our timeline that we could have all 408 apps inventoried by the time I come back to present to you in January. That would be my goal. So it'll give us the rest of November, the rest of December to work with student services and school principals. And I would be able to come back to the January 3rd meeting to give you a final report out. And in essence then, this is in draft form, but we could actually show you then the digital resource site on the website where people then can access the materials. So this is currently a mock-up of what ITC has worked on for us, but it'll be a complete overview of our digital resources in total. And then if you click on the different tabs, it'll actually give you a list of all the apps available in self-service. It's a nice visual icon, which is an enhancement of currently what was there before. It shows in what grade levels the apps are being deployed. And then it also has an extension that they can click on the app to learn a little bit more about it. So the self-service apps are there. Our class link resources, which are mostly our textbook and or Tier 1, I would say curricular materials, will be available as resources listed as well. And then the web resources listed also in self-service would again be posted by icon for visual appeal, the title, and where it's deployed there. So I would say this is a draft because obviously they don't have the final spreadsheet yet, but we'll be working with ITC to make the final arrangements, and again, shooting for that January 3rd as a final report out to the board and the public. So open it up to any questions about the process.
Mr. Zenobia?
Thank you, Jody. So, in looking back, it's been roughly, 10 years since these have been accumulating, correct? What was the process for bringing a lot of these on board in the past? And I guess the reason I ask it is, how these will be vetted going in the future of any new apps that we would bring in. So, did they all run through TNL? Was it mainly through technology, or how did all these apps end up?
Right, so I would say Steve's team has taken the definite lead on it, but they have been collaborative. They didn't do it in isolation. They were collaborative with content area coordinators and directors and principals over time. But you can imagine, and kind of what I'm finding, if you have turnover in coordinators, right, or if you have turnover in principals, et cetera, there was never final loop, in essence, that went back around, or an annual or semi-annual way to monitor usage and then kind of discard over time. So we just kept, in essence, piling up and didn't have an auditing process throughout the years. I would say how we're going to prevent that now is that there will be, like, the head of teaching and learning as sort of the gatekeeper that will have the final sign-off. And I expect that will happen on an annual basis. So that's how we prevent that from not happening again.
And so a lot of these just came because a school, a principal, a teacher said, hey, we need this app for our kids. And is that kind of how a lot of them?
It could have been that. There are so many unique instances, quite honestly, as I go through the apps myself. I mean, as I mentioned in the executive summary, right, there's like a Huddle app. Well, I know like our high school football players use that to break down film. So like all the Huddle app is deployed on the football players' iPads, things like that. There was one app where like one person in the whole system uses it. Well, we found out it's the engineering academy teacher that uses it at South High School, and it's just the teacher using this certain app for some of the construction classes. So it's kind of been an interesting fact-finding effort, but there are a variety of ways, in essence, that they have gotten onboarded. I would say all well-intentioned. Most of the principal resources, a teacher might come forward and say they wanted to use it as a supplemental material. And then again, in the past, the ITC team would check with maybe the math coordinator and the principal and say, is this of value for the student? And that's how the decision in the past would have been made.
Mr. Coleman?
It looks like this list may include some resources that, like when we approve a textbook, there'll be other digital resources. Are those in this list? I'm assuming they are.
So they're not in the current spreadsheet that you have, but they will be listed as a class link resource, yes, for like TCI, StudySync, all those things that we've adopted are listed under class link. They're not currently listed under that spreadsheet.
Okay, got it.
It kind of sits separate from that.
Got it. And you showed a little bit of what that will look like.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Again, moving forward, just to add to, in case the tech side of this, and I hope I'm saying this right, it's the self-service is where we have the apps seeded, if you will. And so we either deploy them automatically by class roster or dependent upon if they're in the class and need the app. But that's also how they can register, in essence, for an app through the self-service.
So if you look at the list in front of us here, the McGraw-Hill K-12 Connected, that's not associated with the textbook, is what you're telling me. That's a different resource, a different app that we're using.
No, that would have been associated with like a McGraw-Hill resource, but it might not be what you have fresh in your mind from our like newly adopted materials.
Okay,
So,
okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I had a couple just clarifying questions,
Sure.
Jody, if you don't mind. And I went through the original list with a little more fidelity too, and just looked at a couple different categories. If I understand correctly, like the go forward plan would be every app is kind of linked or inventoried to either a specific user or a specific class or a specific curriculum, so that in the future, it's not the CSI investigation to figure out where all the apps came from, but it's
Yeah.
really this one is connected to this, academic plan or curriculum.
Yes.
And so then those that are requested, I would think that if we approve curriculum, that textbook or that digital platform is associated with that text, that would live with us as long as the text that we've approved.
Correct.
But if we get into more of a cycle where we're kind of looking at this on an annual basis and saying, okay, we understand out of the however many hundred apps we have in the district, what kind of points to different teaching and learning activities or student support activities, and even like what the investment is in all of that? Or is that,
Well, we would have the financials associated with it. I would say the spreadsheet you're looking at, for the most part, are all free apps.
yeah,
I mean, you could see where the few that cost were.
right? I mean, based on what I analyzed, the majority of the cost associated with apps is under student services. And I'm assuming that's because there's some apps in there that are specific to special education that have
Correct.
large price tags on them, right? And so there are
Yes.
very few students
This
using
is
those.
correct, yes.
Yep, so that actually makes sense to me. Of all the teaching and learning related apps, I mean, I think of the 72, it was like $120 or something in possible cost. That's not the actual cost per student, but
Yep.
so those are areas where, and I think unfortunately sometimes we fall into this trap of, well, it's free, and it's free is good, and so we should just put it on there because it's free with,
Yeah.
maybe we're not using the right categories to decide whether it's actually valuable versus just free.
Right. I will say the teaching and learning team had a lot of conversation around, and I've used this word a million times, but the guaranteed and viable curriculum that we provide for students. And so we want to have that as the tier one most accessible app, if you will, and that likely is coming from the determined resource that we have in the course. And then it's really up to, I would say, the teaching and learning, our team, to decide what, in essence, the other supplementary resources are. And more is not better in many cases. So I just want you to know that, yes, those are the conversations that we're having. Kids, adults, everyone can be sometimes distracted in terms of how many apps or what buttons to press next. But we're really focused on the foundational skills that our kids need academically, and we know that that can happen with a core group of apps, and that's where we're heading.
I think that's the right direction. I mean, I think it's good for us to stop periodically and take a look at these things. Maybe a specific example, and it's not a specific app, but when I look at this long list, I look at a lot of these that are allocated at the, largely at the elementary level. And there's a lot of apps that are specific to math.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good apps, Matific, Dreambox, there's a lot in there that I know my own kids have used, but I wonder sometimes, and I think as parents, sometimes there's too many apps to navigate for the kids, and so they might all be of great value. But I also know, especially at the elementary level, for families that have multiple children, that they'll use different classroom communication apps for different teachers because those teachers have different preferences. And that causes parents to have different kinds of logins, and you're getting emails from a whole bunch of different places. So are we doing anything to simplify how that looks in the classroom?
Yes, I think, I mean, if you've been, the older people in the audience, including myself, the pendulum is definitely swinging back, I would say. Meaning that, I believe when we started this 10 years ago, there were core apps, and we didn't stray too far from that. And then we kind of opened up. We had a little bit of a different mentality for several years here about personalized learning options and allowing a variety of choice, both by school, site-based, not maybe district centralized, and now I would say the pendulum is swinging back to tightening it back up again. So we, again, are in the sphere of tightness. We're in the mode of less is more, including trying to systematize, to your point, Dr. Piasek, the methods and modes of which we communicate via technology, and then indeed what is accessible by a parent as well, so.
My experience has been the kids pick up on the apps really quickly, and then the parents are left trying to figure out which kids' assignments are showing up in which app, and that gets complicated really fast.
Sure.
All right, those are my main questions. Was there anything that Mrs. Kozlowski raised outside? I know
She
can't be here
actually,
tonight, but-
when I spoke with her on the phone, she was just really pleased with the process. I think, Mr. Zenobia, to your point, I think she just wanted to be assured that there is maybe a more succinct process moving forward, and that it will occur on an annual basis, and that it is a transparent process, and people know what it is. So again, I think she'll have another time, I would say, when I bring it back in January. We'll discuss kind of the final findings, if you will, and then I'll show a mock-up of the website, and certainly we can make any tweaks with her or anyone's feedback at that time, but I think that would be my plan then, is just to continue to finish this process over the next few months with student services and the schools, and then be ready to give a final report out in January.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Thank you for that. I know a lot of work went in for Steve's team as well to pull this together, so I appreciate that. All right, next in our general business is an update on the common school funding library purchases.
Right, so again, Carrie, I know you're watching, you're missing all the fun here. This is another item Mrs. Kozlowski brought forward for future business. The request is just basically wanting financial information for the purchases for our library resources. So just to remind everyone that we do have an amount of common school funding each year that our school district, every school district is given. Our projected allocation for this school year is $607,014. Again, the common school funds are distributed through state statute 4370, and that the funds specifically are only used for things inside the school library. And I have the DPI website up, but it's very very tight as to what can be purchased with that money. So with that said, this again is kind of a new learning over this past month for me, because again, I would say that Steve had overseen this area in the past, and so now we're kind of transitioning that I am currently the administrator moving forward that will be signing off on purchases in this area. So a couple things I just want to mention. So and Mr. Zenobia, this will be good information for you because you've asked me about this over time, like how many vendors really are we using, right? Who are we purchasing from? So I would say we have three main vendors in essence that we are purchasing from, and it's Follett, it's Overdrive, and it's Amazon. And so I guess the first thing I want to do is bring to your attention, I did put on your desk a hard copy of what an example of an Overdrive quote would be. And so I wanted you to kind of see what the process is. A couple things to make mention. A lot of these vendors, including Overdrive and Follett, have what's called an open line of credit that is built into their contracts. And so what happens is, for example, Overdrive has written in that we have to have a $12,000 opening line of credit just off the bat. So what predominantly happens is, especially for my elementaries, I'll say each elementary school has about a $5,000 line of open credit, if you will, that sits there. And then what happens is, as the librarians accumulate titles and or purchases, either through the renewal process or a new purchase process, they will then put a quote together And when they're ready to submit it, they submit it in essence with that open purchase requisition. So if you look at the quote that you have on your table, for example, this list of titles totals $3,820. And so what I am doing now, and I think this was one of Ms. Kozlowski's kind of concerns in the past, that she doesn't want to come to F&F, in essence, and see the purchases after they're being purchased. She was wondering if there was any way that we could proactively have a look at things before the purchases come through. So what we have done is that I am now the administrator that logs into Skyward and signs off on these like individual quotes from all of our schools before they make the purchase. And then we'll continue to keep track of it, the overall purchases, as we normally would have. Pat Barr works with Sherry Stack to accumulate all the total purchases each month. But that's how, like, the process will happen moving forward. So Overdrive, you'd see that quote, that's an example of what we would get from Follett. That's an example of what we would get from Overdrive. I would say we're still working on the Amazon piece. Currently, how we purchase is the librarian, if they purchase through Amazon, will give the quote to their school principal, who signs off on the Amazon quote with their P card. But again, I'm also working with Sherry Stack to see if there's an e-commerce, it's called, that we can set up that Amazon is a vendor through. And that would allow me then to go in with my administrative rights and see, in essence, an Amazon invoice, be able to approve it before the purchase is made in the same way. What else do I have to tell you? Just overall, I would say, and Steve mentioned this to me, currently, if you look at the first 2 months of the school year, we have, in essence, already spent like 50% of the allocation. So we currently are at $391,144.67. That, in essence, we have spent or have open requisitions for, out of the 607 projected. And he said that is usually what happens every year, that we're fast out of the gates with the allocation in the beginning of the school year. Seemingly, it will taper off in the middle of the school year, and then when we get, in essence, things settle at the end and we see how much we have left, he said then it'll pick up at the end of the school year for the purchases. So I know the request was made, and we'll continue to do this. The request was made that I come every single month to give a report out on this. There may or may not be a lot to report out on. I'll simply give you the month's expenditures, and then I guess if there's questions, that's probably how we'll handle it.
So
I have certainly take suggestions, but it's a newer item that you are requesting, so be open for feedback.
maybe for clarification then, so potentially, Jody, we'd be looking at this 2.5-page spreadsheet with a total
Correct.
on a regular basis. And you will be reviewing then or approving those purchases that
Correct.
actually go through, even on the open orders? Or,
Right, so even though, let's take Hadfield. Hadfield currently has a $5,000 open PO with Follett. The librarian still would have to give me the quote for the amount. I would, in essence, scan the titles for approval. Then yes or no, if I have questions on it. Then they send it to Pat Barr. She puts it in Skyward for the actual amount to go through, and I go into Skyward and then approve it a second time.
So I don't know if you know the answer to this, Jody, but when I just look at this list, and I'm just curious, right? So I see Frindle on the list of books that are to be ordered for Overdrive.
Yep.
I would guess 95% of kids in our district have probably read that book by the time they get to 6th or 7th grade, maybe. So what does that, so it says 12 months, do we have to reorder that every 12
Right,
months?
so Overdrive is a rental in essence. And so, yes, that is a re-up of the lease.
So we would have to specifically reorder things that we want to be in there. There's no carryover of things that just happen to be,
From my understanding, that is correct.
okay.
Yeah, that's why it's sometimes an ongoing process, and I know, like Mr. Zenobia, like sometimes we were like, are they purchasing 1,000 new titles every year? Like all of these new books coming in? A lot of times, no. I couldn't predict the percentage, but it's a smaller percentage. I would say many of these are tried and true books that are on lease, especially in Overdrive, that we just have to re-up in terms of the time that we lease the books in that online format.
Seems very inefficient that some of these are 12 months and some are 24 months and 36. So I don't know how you wrap your head
Yeah, I
around
don't-
that.
Jen, do you have a handle on that at all? I know, like Steve told me, he like zoomed all the common school funding knowledge into Jen's brain. So besides data, Jen, we've asked Jen to help oversee the library media area too. So do you have anything you want to add to that, Ms. Skinnerman?
I think it's
Get that
on.
on for you.
I would just add that that's part of the process that makes it really difficult.
Yeah.
Because not only are things, needing to be renewed at different times, we've tried to consolidate and purchase things like by elementary or middle
Level,
school. And because of common school funds, the way that it's structured, you can't do that. So it's not like we can say, hey, we're going to renew Frindle for every elementary school all at once. We have so many pieces that we have to separate out for the purchasing process and then the renewal piece. And so that's a part that makes it really cumbersome.
Cumbersome, yes.
And hard to work around. The other piece is with Overdrive. There are times that, all of a sudden a student, needs a book and they need it like that day. They forgot it at home or something like that. And we definitely want the book in the hands of kids, whether it's, in person or on the digital with Overdrive. And with Overdrive, it's really easy to download the book and get that. And so having that open line of credit helps us to get the resources to the students when they do need them, when it's not a renewal piece.
Yeah, I appreciate that too, because yes, as I learned, because I did challenge the open PO process as I was trying to wrap around this, and not having an open PO process would drastically adjust the time it takes to get books in the hands of students. And a very specific example was given about a student with an IEP who needed an audio book like in 3 days. And do we not have that open PO? Who knows when that student gets the audio book that they need. So to me, that was my easy solution, is like, let's close these POs down. And but that wasn't a viable option, and we want to be student-centered first. And so we have to work around the complexity of that with the open PO process.
So when hard copies of books are ordered, how do we know if it lands on a library shelf or in a classroom library?
All of the books purchased through common school funds would be in the library. That's
Okay.
part of the requirement for
Okay.
the common school funds.
And then are there
And then-
other budget sources for classroom libraries?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
As you know, we did the classroom audit process, and those, for the most part, had been onboarded over time by teachers exclusively. There have been pockets of district funding, I would say, WEF grants and things like that. The goal has always been, and my team would absolutely love, a process that we could systematically onboard classroom library resources over time. I would just say we haven't been able financially to be in that position yet.
Thank you. Mr. Como?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the lending model on this invoice here, if you don't mind helping me out a little bit. I'm looking at Amelia Bedelia, because I like Amelia Bedelia. Looks, sleeps over, I can read, level 1. So I see that it says that there's 26 checkouts, 1 user, we're ordering 2 units. So I'm thinking, so we're ordering 2 books of, like essentially 2 books that can be checked out, but then I see 26 checkouts, so I'm a little confused as to how to read that.
Right, so Jen plugged this in, but my understanding is you can only check out on the overdrive like 1 book at a time. So if we don't have
So a student can only have 1 book?
that
or-
in the entire school, so like say that
Okay.
book is in the school and we have 1 leased copy,
Okay,
if it's checked out, no one else can access it. So that's
Okay.
why oftentimes we are purchasing multiple titles in overdrive so that more than 1 student can check it out at the
sure.
same time.
That makes sense. What's the 26 checkouts mean, though? I have no clue what that means. Because so we're getting 2 units, 1 student, so that we have 2 books. We could have 2 kids reading it in the entire school. But what's the 26 checkouts mean?
I might have to get back to you on that because I'm not exactly sure. Do you have any clue what
I'm
that?
pretty confident it means 26 times that a
Yes.
student, any student could
Like
access
ever?
that book,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Because it's
In its
either
entirety?
in months or in units.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're either
And it-
getting it for a period of time, 1 user at a time, or we're getting it
Yes,
in increments, in unit counts.
Okay.
So 26
times before we. read
essentially self-destructing copies of the
Gotcha.
book.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that's what really confuses the whole
Yeah.
renewal process, because when are those 26 times over versus the 12 months? So
Yeah.
they have different, processes to follow for each of those.
Boy. Oh, that is
It's
messy.
very complicated. Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
Mr. Zenobia?
So along this line of inquiry, I guess, at a loss for words. How do we even know, like, so just this list here, are all the books on, let's just say this invoice, are all these books that we know are being read by students on a monthly basis? Or are they reading 2 or 3 of these titles, a lot of them, and then the rest of the titles are just kind of in there that we're paying for? How does this really, what are we really paying for? We're paying for the access to have just about any book we want online, correct? That's part of this. These books are online so the kid can read it on their iPad or whatever. How many of these books are really being read or being checked out? Do we have any?
Yeah, they would have records of this in the system through Destiny.
Destiny.
Through Destiny. I could go back and have Melina, pull a usage report for all of the titles. We have that information.
Well, and the point is not to get into so deep in the weeds of the information that, how do you make sense of it? I guess my question is, in a service like Overdrive, we're purchasing the access to all these titles. Do we really need to do that, or could we not buy some of these more popular titles,
Well, we do, and
download them, and have them for access all the time to?
Yes, right? And I just want to clarify, we control what titles go into Overdrive, okay? So we're not subscribing to an overall service, we select what goes into that. But yes, I would say, I'm unclear about how, in essence, they might determine an online copy versus a hard copy in the library. I think a lot of it might have to do with usage. I think they also look at, I guess, determining whether or not students are accessing material via the iPad or a hard copy. I think they're all having those part and parcel conversations about, what should we have hard copies of, what should be accessible online. They're constantly monitoring and reviewing usage and just using their professional opinion in order to make those purchases for our kids.
And not only looking at usage at like the certain grade levels, but thinking beyond that grade level. So there's an elementary text that is actually pretty appropriate for a high school student who has like a really low reading level, and making sure that that's not only available for our elementary students, but it's available for our high school students. So it's not just about the book that, frequency there, it's like how is the book being used throughout the whole system, that they have to work together around, do we renew this or not? Do we get digital and, live book? All those things are factored into it, especially with those really popular books where the kids are coming in and they want it right away. We want them reading. So we might get a couple, books and ebooks so that more kids can have the book.
Sure. And my question is really just one of efficiency. If we're spending this amount of money on all these books, if they're being inputted into the system because they're all being read, great. But if, we're buying a bulk or a batch for 2 or 3 titles, then we're just getting taken.
Yeah.
Yep. And we put
And
that,
you don't think that's happening?
like Mrs. Landish had said, we put that batch together. We're not saying we'll take this batch. It's based on the renewals, it's based on, requests, it's based on what kids are already checking out. And they always have a list of what books to order next, whether there's new books coming out, or, hey, if we can get a few more copies of a popular book, then that would be added to the list. So we don't pick like this package of books versus this package. It's really like our choice of what books.
Okay, thank you.
So again, what you'll be expected, Dr. Piasek, to see monthly then would just be a total. So, you have this sub-tab for September, October, then I'll bring the November expenditures each month, and I don't know if I do it indefinitely or until somebody, again, it was just a item for future business, and we'll just continue to handle that.
I think to Mr. Zenovia's earlier point, I think it's very interesting to look at it from a financial perspective and really understand. I mean, obviously, there are efficiency benefits to having digital titles for kids, and kids are much better at reading on tablets than we are. I still like to have a book in my hands, but I use the phrase maybe self-destructing. We have a lot of self-destructing titles in our digital library that seem like, we pay for them. Do we know if they're actually being utilized, and is that an effective or an efficient model for us versus, the library inventories that we have? And I'm not asking somebody to go do a big exercise on that, but I think maybe keeping an eye on how much are we actually putting into these expiring resources as opposed to having the physical resources that can be repurposed. I just think that's an interesting business question that we should probably understand.
Sure.
Probably goes hand in hand with our app conversation. So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I did have a question about that. So there's a few things in here that fall within these common school funds. One that jumps out to me because it's been talked about a lot would be Brain Pop. So that really, I guess maybe it's in between. It maybe acts as an app, but there's online titles within it, and that's why it's in here. My question would be, why are those funds being used for that resource here as opposed to the app review process we just discussed?
So this was a subscription service that has just honestly sat here for as many years as anyone can recall. That's why that purchase comes out annually. And I know this, I think, is how this originally came to be. That line item was questioned at F&F, and then kind of trailed back to, let's talk about it in teaching and learning. So this was something that was a subscription service that was approved before again, I would say these processes have been put into place. So that's just something we have to continue to look at more proactively moving forward. And I think I'm confident in the system that we have that we'll be able to do that now. You know, we have 2 new professional librarians as well that have entered that team, and now with Jen's leadership overseeing, so we have a lot of people asking a lot of questions in a good way, right? The learning curve for the library media people as well, and so we really have a prime opportunity to get more tight and collaborative, and efficiencies, as you said it. We have to try to find ways that they're not just punching numbers and data with all these purchases. We need to maximize their time with students in the most optimal way we can, and not having them do, which is a ton of clerical work as well. So, work in progress.
I think maybe one positive I would just reiterate to the work the administration and the media teams have done, or the library services teams have done, and also I think just as a result of having new board members coming on board, people are asking the right questions, and I think these conversations about, you know, one committee is approving vouchers, those vouchers are connected to an app, the dollars are coming from common library funds, you know, all these things are kind of starting to come together, and I think as we get organized around reporting out to the right places and the transparency on all of that, it starts to make a lot more sense for everybody about how we're using those, you know, community-provided resources to put the right resources in front of the kids. So I think these are the right conversations to have. But I do appreciate all the work that's going into getting this information in front of us. Anything else? Okay. All right. So we'll move into our content areas. First, tonight, we're going to talk about literacy with an update on secondary literacy, presented by Tiara Rogers and Nancy Ronke. Welcome.
Make sure you pull that mic close too for you both. Project.
Do we need to pull up or anything? Or just? Would you like for us to pull the presentation up?
Yeah, sure. If you would, that'd be great. And so they provided a really nice overview for us that, just as a reminder to our community and anyone else who's curious, is available on the Teaching and Learning YouTube channel, and the link is provided in the board docs. Just with the goal of being a little bit more efficient with our time, we asked people to review that in advance. There was a lot of really great information in there about progress on the high school study sync, and then some updates with respect to 6th through 8th grade and some pilots that we'll be working on. So I think, unless you want to, maybe you could just provide some introductory comments about where we're at, and then I'm sure people have some questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, so, and I know we talked about this, but yes, just briefly how Study Sync's going, prime them for the middle level, and then I actually gave them feedback already about the parent piece, so I know that they're going to have some updates about how we're pulling parents into the picture.
Great. Yeah, how is it going in general with?
I want to speak about last Thursday. So last Thursday, we brought all the teachers together, 9 through 12, and they started planning units 2 and 3. And the excitement in the rooms, all 4 rooms, was palpable. I was very, very happy with how they're integrating what we do really well with WCOR and AVID and putting that into units 2 and 3 to make it as engaging as possible for all students. Something else that we highlighted in the video was the dashboard, and I hope that you were able to really zero in on that, because if you look up there, it shows the standard mastery view. So you can see at a glance at a district lens, but also each individual classroom, which standards are we mastered and which ones do we need to work on, and that's where small group instruction and conferring really happens. We haven't been able to do that as efficiently as we're able to do with this data dashboard.
And I would just add, in addition to this past Thursday, the teachers getting together from approval back in July, we were able to get with our teachers in August and we've been hitting PD really hard. We work collaboratively with our Study Sync trainers. We do virtual training. They are like very accessible to us, very responsive to our teachers. If they send them a chat, they have an inquiry, an issue they're running into within 24 hours, they're getting back to teachers with their concerns and a solution. So just our trainers have been super helpful with us onboarding. And again, because it was a quick turnover, it was, we had a month before we were going to have students in front of us. So just the engagement of the teachers, just the hard work that they've been putting in has been just very impressive. I've been able to get out in classrooms and just what they're doing with our kids, and hopefully you were able to see some of the videos that we put in there. You could just already see the difference in our high school English classrooms.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you. I just had a comment. So way back when we approved this, I knew that it was gonna take off and be implemented so well. And so my comment is the fact that I'm just very excited to see how the standards are being implemented and how this is an easy, accessible tool for the students, and how not only the students are engaging with the teachers, but they're engaging with one another with Study Sync as well. And so I really do appreciate the 1 month turnaround that you all did, and the Zoom sessions and the onboarding workshops that took place to get this started. So I have nothing but positive things to say about Study Sync. A lot of schools are using it, private and public. So I was just super excited to see this, and I can't wait to see more successes as we go throughout the school year with this. So.
Us too.
I have maybe just a quick question about implementation. Some of the photos that you shared in your overview video, I see hard copy papers, and then I see the electronic content. I know there were initially some questions about how will the students and the teachers engage either digitally or in hard copy. What are you finding with respect to handouts, and what does that look like? I mean, I hate to get to the cost question right away, but are we creating a lot of handouts? Are we doing more digital work? And how's that balance out in the classroom?
I love that question, and the word balance is exactly what's happening. I think about a class at Waukesha West, and you had one student doing the digital, and right next to that person, they were using the student consumable. And sometimes the students are flipping back and forth between digital and the student consumable. Those student consumables are included in the cost, so it's not something that's extra.
So we're not having teachers printing things out, it's actually the kit is in the classroom that they can pull from?
Correct.
Okay.
And one of the most wonderful things about the student consumable is for every single writing piece, every single unit, they have a student model that is right there in the student consumable. We've never had that before. And not just that, but it has a student model that's revised. So then they're able to annotate that and talk about that and actually model their writing after another student.
Thank you. That helps clarify. Mr. Zenobia?
Yeah, I had a question for you on the on the data portion that shows the varying degrees to which our middle schoolers are reading. And it looks like there's a tab there that kind of defines this, but can you tell us a little bit about, for instance, what is the real difference between those given the basic designation versus proficient? I mean,
Oh, you're in the middle school.
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm on that data set.
Because we were still in the high school.
I thought you're completely done. I just jumped
Oh,
ahead
no,
on
it's no problem. Were there any other questions in regards to high school before
Well,
we?
and
No, you can come back to it.
I was going to
Okay.
try to maybe clarify Mr. Zenobia's question to it, that at the high school level, when we say, the percentage of standards mastery, what does that mean for a student? Does that mean proficient?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm just, the high school level right now, but.
In the definition, I would assume would be the same across the board, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Whether it be the high school, the middle school level, I mean, basic is what function? There's somewhere that half the skills, I mean, what
Well,
does that percentage look like?
Well, in the data that we shared for middle school, that's forward data. So that's the state assessment data that was shared in that slideshow. So the ratings go below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. So of course, we want our students performing in the proficient and advanced. So we are definitely looking at our learners that are in that basic category, and we're focused on moving them up to that proficiency level. So when you were asking about sort of what differentiates, if students are in that basic, they're not quite meeting proficiency yet, so they're approaching proficiency.
And let me ask my question a little better. So in trying to move the numbers here, on what level are, so again, in the basic category, are half the kids between proficient and failing? I mean, I guess that's my question. I mean, in that big margin, what does that really mean? Does it mean that, that we have a lot of kids that are close to being proficient, or do we have a lot of kids that are just above failing grade? I mean,
Well, what I did is I just pulled up the slide because I believe this is the slide that you're referring to with the
Yes.
forward data for the middle schoolers. So when you're looking at the basic, below basic, and again, on this slide, it is broken down by each of our 3 middle schools. So Horning was the first school up there, so 77% of our students, they're in that basic or below basic. So that, just for full transparency, no, that's not where we want our students to be, because those students are not meeting proficiency right now. So that would be significantly over, almost, well over half of our students are not at proficiency. And then if you go across the board there, so if you look in the reverse, we have at Horning just under a quarter of our students are at proficiency or advanced. Looking at Butler, we have 36%, so slightly better. And then at Les Paul, we have 40%. So across our middle schools, we have less than half of our students performing at that proficient or advanced level. And this is specific to English language arts.
thank you.
And I think maybe that's the lead into why we're looking
Yes.
at curricular resources
Yes,
for middle
yes.
school. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Needs assessment, right?
Yeah.
So we can transition over to the middle school. So actually, Wednesday, last week Wednesday, we were with our middle school team, and we are about to begin our pilot. And the middle school, they are starting with Study Sync. So what the high school selected as our curricular resource, their first pilot is going to be with Study Sync. So we are in that piloting process right now. But again, just back to Dr. Piasek's point, our data is showing us that we need to be doing something different in our middle school classrooms if we're going to adjust like the trend that we're seeing, because again, I still have that data slide up. It has our 3-year trend data there, and it's been pretty consistent over the past 3 years, and shifting more towards more of our students falling in that basic and below basic area. So we definitely want to see that trend adjust going in the other direction. We also, similar to high school, the standards were updated in May of 2020. So we have to make sure that our curriculum is aligned to the new Wisconsin DPI standards for English language arts. So that's another driving reason why we wanted to do this curricular review in middle school. Anything else you want to add?
How much variability is there right now between middle schools in terms of implementing even the basic units that are in place?
You mean what we're piloting or
No,
what's currently
just
here?
what's currently being done.
What's currently happening, there's not a lot of difference between the middle schools.
Okay.
We have summative assessments that have been written, there's mini lessons, there's an at-a-glance document. What is missing right now is a very tight spiral of standards, 6 through 8, that we cannot guarantee.
Not to get too overwhelmed with the data that we're looking at, because no matter how you look at it, it doesn't look great, right? But I see some trends where things are getting progressively worse in some schools and maybe not in others. And so I was just curious if that was potentially because of how it was being implemented or what we're using as a resource right now. Or maybe other factors altogether.
I would say there's multiple complex factors that go into those
Sure.
proficiency levels. We know the guaranteed and viable curriculum is one main ingredient, but I would say that school in particular did some things with the master schedule, and they also had a pretty evolved PLC process. Again, a lot of different things that lift the entire student achievement picture, but those would be some things that stand out to me.
Mr. Moore?
No, yeah, I was going to agree with actually Ms. Landish that when I'm looking at this, I think it's multiple facets, and I'm very understanding. So that there's reasons why percentages are the way they are, and the curriculum is one piece of it, but there are multiple facets. However, I do invite the professionals to share what do they need help with from the school board on those other multiple layers, so that we can get our students to proficiency. So if there is something besides the student materials that is also causing delay or deficits, I want to be sure that you have my support to kind of figure out what we can do to support you to get our students where they need to be. So.
And then just one thing, oh, I'm sorry, do you have a question?
I didn't know if you were going to respond or if it was just a comment, but Tara, do you want to go ahead?
I was going to share a different slide, but then I saw Mr. Como.
Okay, go ahead, Mr.
Oh,
Cole.
yeah, I just, I had noticed that you used IMET as your reviewing resources. And have we used IMET before? Is that-
Correct.
and
That's what we use
something-
for the high school piloting process as well.
Okay, okay. I appreciate that.
Oh, I was just gonna highlight, as I just shared before, with the pilot process, we are beginning with Study Sync, and we are piloting the resource in both our dual and our monolingual classrooms. Our dual language will be doing a pilot of a resource just specifically for dual. That'd be the second pilot in between the two, and then we'll be piloting My Perspectives after winter break. We'll do some onboarding and work during Winter Institute with the middle school team that's doing the pilot. And My Perspectives was another resource that the high schools did also pilot as well. And our goal is to have a resource selected by our team, feedback from our teachers and students by March is what we're aiming for.
So not having any prior knowledge of the quality of the resources or the cost of these three different options, is there some inherent benefit to using a resource like Study Sync that also allows teachers to become familiar with that process and those resources so that we also have flexibility with our staff? If someone's teaching at the 8th grade level versus the 10th grade level, I mean, is there continuity in this like there was with our social studies resource, or is it a completely different resource for 6th, 7th, 8th grade?
It's a great question. There's some pros and cons for both. Study Sync does allow for 6 through 12 so that at any grade level you can access any grade level, which is a really great pro. Another pro for using Study Sync across 6-12 is that it has a binder, which is really like a learner portfolio or writing portfolio that would be with the students 6 through 12. One of the cons would be some of the skills lessons. If students are exposed to that 6 through 12, that might it might be repetitive possibly, but it's something that I'd want to dive a little bit more into and actually experience that with students.
Well, maybe as a follow-on to that, I know we spend a lot of time talking about advanced levels of math or different levels of math, and that skill level is not necessarily grade level. The same applies to ELA, and I know we have students that have different reading levels and comprehension levels. I also know that we have the state requirement that we have 4 years of English at the high school level, so it doesn't really help if kids are knocking out all their high school English classes in middle school. But with a 6 to 8 resource, I guess there's pros and cons again, right? Is there an opportunity potentially to have like an English 9 option in the middle school, depending on the resources that we're choosing?
Yes.
Or are
there
these kids that
some-
are taking
yeah.
APs anyway? I don't know.
It's going to be all part and parcel, I would say, of the process, kind of reanalyzing the course structure. As you know, when we adapt, we're kind of also looking at the course sequence. So I think that's going to be all conversations that we have as part of the process.
Yeah.
So,
No, I appreciate there's a lot that goes into it. Maybe if I could just leave one thought is that I don't want our kids to run out of learning opportunity because our resources stop at the end of 8th grade, right? So I think that continuity is really important. So we've got all the right levels for those kids. Anything else on this? I mean, I'm excited to see what you come back with because it seems like we're long overdue, so.
Yeah, piloting team, the teachers are really excited at the middle school level.
Good. I mean, I know what we're going to talk about later too shows that when we make the investment in the right resources, we can actually start to move the needle. So I'm excited to see this. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your support.
All right, next is an update on the secondary math pathway. So we have Mrs. Herman. Welcome.
yeah. You want to set this up, or do you want me to, or?
Set it up, sure.
Well, just,
Get set up while you sit.
okay, just to review, we had a pretty lengthy conversation about this at Teaching and Learning last month, but it also extended into the full board meeting during that month as well. And so the proposal you have in front of you is, I really want Rachel to talk about the process that she engaged with the teacher teams to allow us to get to this point. So that might not have been emphasized as much in the presentation, but I think it's important that you hear the teacher voice and how we got to the place of the proposal currently in front of you. I want to just reiterate that this is not an action item at this point because of the course sequence we ended up with and the current courses that we have on the books. So she can go into depth more about that, but I just wanted to set that up.
Sure. So just a little bit of history and context to what Jody was referencing with our teacher teams since I was last here. Our middle school team, you'll be hearing from us very shortly. They are in the middle of piloting their first curricular resource. And we will be, as Jody referenced earlier with the ELA, tackling that course sequence as part of that curricular process with middle school. So there's not a whole lot that's changing in terms of our course sequence or the proposal regarding middle school. But since we've last talked, we did have some significant discussion around what we wanted to do in lieu of not moving forward with an integrated 3 with TRIG or an integrated 3 with statistics course. And so our teachers really spent a lot of time talking about how do we allow all students a pathway into mathematics? How do we allow all students an opportunity to accelerate within mathematics? And that's where we landed on what you see in front of you. So I think what's probably a good place to start is right down here in this lower left-hand corner. This is where we start with our high school required courses for, we talked about this last time, for most of our students. They start their freshman year with integrated math 1. Their sophomore year, they move into integrated math 2. And then after their sophomore year, they have that decision point. And so with the feedback from the board last time, quantitative reasoning was approved. And we had then conversation about what were we going to do with this other option. And what we landed on was we are going to maintain our Algebra 2 and Honors Algebra 2 pathway that currently exists. Both of those pathways allow our students to move into an accelerated pathway as well, an accelerated pathway that leads them to Calc BC, or a pathway that leads them into taking some pre-college math, some math that's more lending itself to whatever career pathway they want to go into. So we feel like the options that we landed on still open the doors to all students that we have in our system. I think the other piece that I'll just reference in case it wasn't explicit in the presentation is that we're moving forward with our accelerated Calc 1 and accelerated Calc 2 option. You still see AP Calc BC on the graphic, but eventually that will be, I don't want to say weeded out, but that will be a class that eventually phases out. We kept it on there because we do have students right now in some of our buildings who, going into next year, will take Calc AB. But again, as our freshmen, sophomores move into this pathway, they will end with accelerated Calc 2, and Calc BC will not be a pathway for them. But again, wanted to keep it on there for the next at least year or two while we have students continue through that course. And then as a reminder, accelerated Calc 2 leads students to taking that Calc BC exam, which is worth the 9 credits. Waukesha West currently employs this model, and they have upwards of 80 students enrolled in those 2 courses every year. And so I think that's, again, really significant, because if we look at the buildings that are offering Calc BC, we struggle to run that, and we have the students traveling from building to building, and it's really just not ideal. And so this option takes these 2 courses, takes these 3 years and puts them into 2, and again, we've seen a lot of success with that model in the building that it's been implemented in. So I've done a lot of talking. I'm going to stop talking and let you ask questions about this new proposal.
I would like to start, first of all, just to thank you for being creative and open-minded to this. I actually really like this plan. I think it gives a lot of options for students to go in a lot of different directions. I mean, one of the things, and this, it really is the result of AP Pre-Calc now being an option for us, because I can look at a on-track math student who takes integrated math 1, then 2, then algebra 2, and then can take an AP math class in their senior year if they're deciding, hey, now I want to go down this path. So we're not creating a situation where you either have to choose to go, one direction or the other. I did want to clarify, because if I look at this correctly, a student should be able to go from algebra 2 back to the lower section. Can they go back then to pre-college math? They don't have to take quantitative reasoning to get into that
Correct.
right-hand side.
Correct.
So really anything is available to the students who take algebra 2
Correct.
on the right-hand side.
Correct. Yeah.
That makes sense. And then another clarification was just that, I know we're going to talk about potentially the electives at some point too, to fulfill the 4 credits of math.
3 credits.
3. In high school, it would be, so they could stop with quantitative reasoning and then could go straight to some of those electives if they chose to.
Correct.
Okay.
We do need to, right now, the way in which our board policy is written, we don't specify the courses after integrated 1 and integrated 2. So technically, that 3rd credit is left open, and so we would need to have conversation on if we want to specify that 3rd credit is Algebra 2, Honors Algebra 2, or quantitative reasoning, or if we leave that up to counselors, because technically a student could say, I don't want to take any of these, I want to take AP statistics.
Data science, yeah.
And so we might eventually need to do a policy revision and put that back into our policy.
I think the one thing I would want to look at there is just what that would do with respect to ACT scores, since that's kind of that standard assessment for high school math. Not that all kids are going to use the ACTs necessarily for college, but I think that's probably the only place we would see that showing up. And I say that having no problem with the quantitative reasoning course, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
So,
our math teachers would highly advocate for having that back-end policy that students would have to take one of these 3 courses. We're meeting with our counselors. I'm actually meeting with them on Thursday to share this plan with them, and provided they also don't see any disadvantage to that, we will most likely be working with our team to come back and put that back in policy.
okay.
The other piece, that this AP Pre-Calc is technically a new course that would be on our books, and so we will be coming forward pretty fast and furious, because we like to, again, we're kind of counting this as an information update to you, but coming to you, we want to get that on the books as early as next year, we think. Our teachers are really eager to get that going. They would all, anybody who teaches it attends an AP Summer Institute, but we would want to, again, offer that as soon as possible. It's a really fantastic opportunity for our students.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Dr. Piasek. I had one question because I do like this plan. However, going back to what you all said about the policy with the students having to take either Algebra 2, Honors Algebra 2, or Quantitative Reasoning, my question would be, looking at the pre-college math and industrial math, I'm just thinking in my head a scenario where math is required for 3 years. And so there are students who just want to be 3 years and done. They don't want to take math their senior year, and they shouldn't have to. They want to probably take another art class or theater class or maybe work half day, whatever the case is. They should not have to. And so for those type of students, I'm only thinking about them in a small scenario. If they, still have those 3 options available, quantitative reasoning, pre-college math, or industrial math. Like, is that an option right now?
So they would not have to take a senior year math course if they did not want to. So for that student, that pathway would typically look like they would take integrated 1 their freshman year, integrated 2 their sophomore year, quantitative reasoning their junior year, and that would fulfill their 3 credits of math. And then their senior year, they could elect to not take a math course and, to your point, explore other desired pathways.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I think this is just a nice way to give students the right options, given some of the last-minute changes we had made. So again, I appreciate your work on that, and I'll be very curious to see what the interest level is for these various courses and how students start to navigate that. So I think we've got plenty of great choices for them. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next area that we're going to be talking about is in science, and we'll have an update tonight from Erica Yoss on environmental education.
Hello.
Welcome.
So I'm Erica Yoss. I am the K-12 Science Environmental Education coach, and then I'm a couple here with me. She's the site manager at EB Shirts, which is our main facility for our program. She is the one who does all the real work. I just get to come and usually talk to you. So she came today to help with the update. So I know many of you watched the video, but really we're just here to kind of celebrate all of the great things we've been able to do last year in our outreach, moving more towards a community-based program, not just for our schools.
So why don't you just say out loud, so again, Dr. Piasek mentioned this, right? Part of this is a proactive way to do the presentation up front, but like I put it out on Twitter, I was so excited about it, right? We are doing a lot of great things, thanks to both of you and your leadership. So can you just kind of highlight and spotlight a few things?
Sure. So a few of the things we've been doing, we have worked really hard on integrating into the curriculum that the students do in their classrooms, specifically their science curriculum. So it's not just something separate when they come to visit us, it's within what they're doing. But the big programs that we've been doing is we have built a greenhouse on our property. So we have a huge garden. We have the greenhouse for students. We've been working really diligently to have our programming kids who are there work in it, but also we have been working with some of the other schools and bringing their family consumer science courses in, as well as the garden clubs, so that we have other students utilizing it. We have been doing a lot of work with outdoor classrooms. So how can we help the classroom teachers bring their students outside, doing the regular lessons, the regular curriculum, but outdoors. So we know the benefits of that, both for the student and for their academics. We also run a summer camp every year through summer school, and because it's through summer school, it's free for all of the students. They sign up for 1 week. It's a half day, and we're lucky that we can partner with the City Park and Rec, so students whose families need care during the day, they just walk right over to their door and they have their afternoon care provided for them. I actually taught summer school for the first time this year, and it was a lot of fun. We get to get in the river, the kids have a blast, and I mean, our signups are filled within like hours of when that goes up. So we were glad we were able to make it to 4 weeks this year. We also been really working hard on our 4K programming. Our 4K students at our community partners have been asking for more programs. So we came up with a program series that's themed around the seasons. So we have a fall, winter, spring, and summer program. We really focused on the 4K standards of movement and art and integrate the environmental ed standards with it as well. And then another one is the clean water plant. So our 5th grade program is typically been at the marsh and then at the river. If any of you have been a chaperone on that field trip, you get to do the really long walk. But this year we added an option where they could go to the clean water plant, and they got to tour it. The chaperones were in for a treat of that place because it smells, but the kids loved it. I don't think they knew what they were signing up for when the chaperones signed up for that. But we've done a lot of really cool things. My favorite thing, though, because I'm just going to put this one, is we had to work with Brent Suter, who was a baseball player for the Brewers. He wrote a book about how different ways that kids can help the planet. And our students from Prairie came over and visited, and they actually got to write a whole page of the book with their ideas of how they can help the planet. So we have published authors in our schools now because of that. So
That's great. I do appreciate the variety of resources that we make available to kids. The other thing that I really appreciate, you kind of alluded to it, the encouragement to get kids outside, to be in that living laboratory, for them to be immersive and really exploring, and not necessarily being told with a sheet of paper, like, here's the science of the cell or something. They're working through that. I think that's the best way for them to learn. And even in the winter, I see the outdoor field trips and stuff happening and in the snow, and so we should take advantage of all of that, because I think that's the cool thing about being in the Midwest, is there's just so much happening outside. And I know, you're very strategic about at what grades kids are having different experiences. And that's one of those things, I think, for us as a district, we do a really good job about being consistent, that all the students are getting very similar experiences in that. And we make those resources available and make the field trips affordable. And I just appreciate that greatly. And I think that's something that we do very well as a district. So it's nice to see that. What other questions do you all have? Mr. Moore?
No, I was going to say I agree with you, and thank you. We do an awesome job with that, and that's why before you started talking, I was like, oh, I was going to raise my hand, because I was impressed with the fact that the tangibles were there. So many tangibles were there for students across all grade levels, and like Dr. Piasek said, it's an opportunity for them to continue on their exploration in the field of science and make those connections. So as they go from kindergarten, elementary school to middle school through high school, from the different seasons, from the water. I'm sorry, I don't have water with me. The water filtration and conservation to other areas of science. So I think that we do an amazing job. So thank you. Excuse me. Let me get some water.
Speaking of water. Mr. Como?
I had mentioned earlier with one of the field trips that we just had approved for our musicians in our district, that was one of the highlights potentially for them. Well, if you were to ask students who graduated from our district what they remember, a lot of times they'll also remember this program, one aspect of it, whether it's Camp Whitcomb or whatever field trip they went on, Lapham Peak, something may have stuck in their head on that. And I think it's really fantastic, as you had mentioned, the various programming that we have throughout the years, and I think it's really important. As our children, grow up with spending so much face time on computers and tablets and phones, being away from that, actually being disconnected, it's hard. It's hard to have those experiences. I do a lot of backpacking and canoeing, kayaking, getting into the wilderness, far away from people, being disconnected. And actually that industry is quite concerned about how it's going to survive. They're seeing fewer people getting outside and exploring. And it's so fantastic that we at least introduce our students to the outdoors and look at what such a great learning environment it is. We can learn so much from nature. And actually we can learn so much from getting away from our normal daily habits. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for the thoughtfulness that you've put in and how it's expanded. And we've been doing a variety of things, especially over the last 10 years. I'm actually glad to see the clean water plant come back. When I was a kid, we did that, and that stuck out in my head, and I'm a pretty old kid. So, but thank you.
Yeah, we actually, most of the adult volunteers that come to Chaperone, the ones who grew up here, frequently will talk about they come to Chaperone because they remember coming as students themselves.
Yes.
We've been around for 47 years now.
Yes.
So.
Mr. Zenobia?
Just a comment, really, but like everyone, I love the outdoors, I think. Our 4 seasons are fantastic, so to get out there and get kids engaged with that is hugely important. I did see this said up to, I think, the 8th grade. Are there a lot of programs that are at the high school level or not so much?
So we offer high school programs if teachers want to take advantage of them. Field trips at the high school level are just very difficult and expensive. And so we offer that, we promote it. It just isn't something that's taken advantage of by the high school teachers very often.
Is there stuff that occurs on school grounds though, or is it kind of
so for us to go to them? We are working on that now. We're adding more into it. So we work with the AP environmental science teachers. We were just at South at the spring last year to work with environmental science projects. So we have more outreach in that way, as opposed to the K-8 where they come to us.
Mm. What are the outdoor classrooms like in January? Are those popular or?
So last year was our first year doing like the pilot work with those outdoor classrooms, and we did 1st grade and 5th grade. First graders were all in. They didn't care. They put their boots on. They were out there. 5th graders a little more hesitant, but they still did it. This year we've expanded it to bringing in a middle school class at Butler. So I have a feeling there's going to be, I have a middle schooler, they don't wear coats. So we're going to work through it. It's going to be an interesting process, but I'm excited to bring in some of our secondary classes in there.
You got to force the kids that wear shorts in January to go outside.
It's a good natural consequence.
It's a good way to handle that. Thank you.
Having middle schoolers, I think the teachers do a really good job of getting lots of advance notices, but as a parent who sometimes forgets things, I can attest to it doesn't always go the way you plan, but the kids will learn. That's the love and logic part of the learning process, so it's good. All right. Well, I don't see any other comments, but thank you very much for the update. It's all really positive.
Thank you.
All right, now moving on to the KPI section of our agenda. We have an update today on our state assessments. So we have Jen Genderman joining us again. Welcome back.
Hi.
And thank you again for the update video on all of that. I think we'll probably definitely want to pull the presentation up for this one as well. There's probably some items we'll want to refer back to.
Okay. Do you want
You kind of set it up, Dr. Piasek. Just want to remind everybody, right, this is the first year that we've had the KPIs operational, and so this will be a consistent board update at teaching and learning in different areas. Sometimes KPI specific, sometimes just state assessment specific. So Jen will outline the timeline kind of for the whole year, as you can see it up there, and she'll just take it away. Good job. Yep.
Last time I was here, we shared the T&L dashboard, so we continue to share that. I know school buildings have also shared that just with their SAIL teams. But like we have here, our reporting out timeline tonight, I'm excited that I'll have some KPI data around the state assessments. I also will have some comparable data. We never know when the data is released, and so it's between board meeting dates and that, it's always, we have to be strategic around that. So I'll just provide a quick overview. I know I did a lot in the video, but I'll provide a quick overview for those watching now, and then share a little bit more about the comparative data. One of our KPIs in the area of ACT assessment focuses on the ACT average composite that will be 1 point above the state average. Here's our 5-year trend, with our most recent being the exact same as the state with an average score of 19.3. And those who maybe aren't involved in the ACT testing or don't have juniors this year or last year, the scale is on the score is on a scale of 1 to 36, so 36 being the highest. So these numbers are within that range. So when you see a 19, it's not out of 100 like a typical assessment is. One of the pieces tonight that we'll be sharing is some comparative data. And before I talk just about the ACT comparative data, I wanted to talk a little bit about what groups or what other districts we're looking at as far as performance. So one of the areas that we're looking at is, the first group is the top 10 largest districts. This is one of our KPIs so that we are in the top 10 performing in certain areas. And so having a better understanding of not only how we are performing, but who is the top 10 performing in the 10 largest districts. So these districts have over 10,000 students. They include Milwaukee, Racine, Green Bay, Sheboygan, Kenosha, Janesville, Appleton, Madison, and Eau Claire. You can see here when it comes to the average ACT composite score, in the most recent spring assessment results, that Eau Claire School District had an average composite of 20.3 compared to our score of a 19.3. The other area of districts that we're looking at how they're performing is our surrounding districts. This is where, we want our students to stay within Waukesha, but it's good to know how other schools are performing. These districts include Elmbrook, New Berlin, Pewaukee, Kettle Moraine, and Mugwanago. Of course, you know this, that all very different sizes compared to Waukesha. So when we look at the performance of other districts surrounding us, in the area of ACT for the average composite, Elmbrook had a score of 23.5, and we had a score of 19.3. All of this data, as far as comparative, whether it be ACT or Forward that I'm sharing, is all on the Wise-Public's website, and it's available to anyone if they would like to dig in a little bit further. I'm just sharing a few high points of some of the work that we use as part of our continuous improvement process. Another way to look at ACT, as I shared in the video, is looking at percentage of students who meet college and career readiness benchmarks in each academic area. This would be looking at English, reading, math, and science, and there's a benchmark score different for each area. And one of the things that ACT does is they help break down the percentage of students that are meeting college and career readiness benchmarks in all 4 areas. So again, English, reading, math, and science. We had 18% of our juniors last year meet benchmarks in all 4 areas. We had 31% of students meet college and career readiness benchmarks in 3 of the 4 areas, and that could be any 3. So for me, it could have been English, reading, and math. For somebody else, it could have been science, math, and reading. So it's any combination of those three. This is just a different way to look at ACT results beyond an average composite score. This kind of helps us a little bit more with the content and academic areas when it comes to the teaching and learning piece. And again, I know this has been the case, but I just want to remind people at home and those in the room that years ago, ACT was only an optional assessment, and it became a required assessment as part of the state. And so we've been doing it as part of our state assessments for several years now.
Jen, maybe just a clarifying question on, I mean, this is really helpful in terms of the college and career benchmarks. Not knowing what the right answer is, these are numbers that at first glance just don't look great, but they're connected to ultimately where the test scores are falling, right? So they're very reflective of the comparison of the ACT scores.
Right.
Do you have the ability to look at those across other districts as well? Okay, that's only our data.
Yeah.
I wonder that.
So the overall average composite is a nice overall score, but it doesn't tell me if we're doing really well in reading or really well in math. The percentage of meeting college and career readiness benchmarks in those areas, we're able as a district to drill down into each subject, and we've done that as a teaching and learning team, and I've been meeting with high school principals looking at their ACT data to better understand those trends, not just last year, but the 5-year trends.
I really, I like this way of looking at things. What might be helpful just for future discussion would be understanding like where we're at with reading, math, science, and English. So I like how you've kind of incorporated all 4 or 3 of the 4. But we may find that, well, we're doing really well on one, but maybe not so well on the other. And that goes into that composite score, so it's not necessarily clear how to differentiate it. But I would guess our math scores aren't as good as our ELA scores, just because that seems to be the trend.
Right. And those are conversations we've had, kind of with the new curriculum adoptions and that sort of thing, looking at all these components of the different ACT requirements.
It's very helpful. Thank you.
Another KPI that we have is focused on our Wisconsin Forward exam in the area of English language arts. Now again, this is testing students in grades 3 through 8. So our KPI is to increase the percentage proficient or advanced to 45% proficient advanced. And here's our 5-year trend, of course, with lack of data from 2019-20 due to COVID. But you can see our most recent data, we're just above the state, that is in yellow. We have 37.7 students proficient or advanced. And looking at those same comparable groups of districts, again, looking at the 10 largest districts across the state, Eau Claire is performing at the top with 43% of their students being proficient or advanced when we look at ELA performance on the Forward exam, and that's for all students grades 3 through 8. When we look at surrounding districts, Pewaukee is leading the pack with 61% of students proficient or advanced.
So there is some good news in here in terms of the improvement, albeit a small improvement. There was improvement at the state level as well that seemed to be a little better, but we started from a higher perspective. So I think maybe the year-to-year trends is something that we really need to look at, especially in the absence of that COVID year data set.
Yep. And honestly, as I am at district assessment meetings and hearing how, as we're going through the data and between this and other information, it seems to be the trend that most people performed a little bit better in 2021-22 than they did 2021. So to be anticipated, but good to see. The other KPI that I'm going to share a little bit more information about is with the Wisconsin Forward exam in the area of math. Our KPI is to increase the percentage proficient to 46% in the area of math. And again, this is for students in 3rd through 8th grade. And you can see we had an increase from 37.4 up to 40.3, again, just above the state level. But like you noted in the other area, the state level had gone up in the last 2 years, and as did we, just a bit. In looking at the comparative data, we had Eau Claire at the top again with 43% proficient, and then looking at the surrounding area school districts, Elmbrook was leading the pack in this one with 23.5%.
I think this slide is actually wrong. I think,
And I just,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I can provide an updated one. I see that with the on the very top. I can provide an updated one. My apologies.
Okay.
One of the other areas is 3rd grade reading as a KPI. So here's the results. Our goal is to increase to 50% proficient. We increased from 32.9 to 37% proficient. And that's just looking at 3rd graders across our district and then the state.
If we could maybe just pause on that one for a second. I mean, I think this is the example to me that's very reflective of a lot of the work that's been done with spelling and language and reading and the resources, right? And phonics, really, I mean, that's a big one. And, not to overreact to, again, one data point, but that was a pretty significant recovery. And, one of the challenges when we're looking at grade level changes year over year is we're actually looking at a different group of students. So we have to be careful about saying that, everybody improved. But we're moving in the direction that's at least maybe back to a pre-pandemic level, and I'm hopeful, we need to continue to monitor this, but that may be the result of putting some more standard and very high-quality, useful resources in place.
Here provided similar comparative data again, the top 10 largest districts, Eau Claire being at the top, and the top 10 or the top surrounding districts, Elmbrook being at the top, and just looking at where we are as a district compared to how others are performing. Again, very different districts from Eau Claire to Elmbrook, but just something to consider as we move forward with our continuous improvement process. Like I shared at the very beginning, we have the timeline for reporting. So up next, in the next report out, will be report cards. They are anticipated to be released in the middle of November. After tonight's meeting, we'll work to update the T&L dashboard with these most recent graphics so that people can refer back to them. And then we'll just plan moving forward with other KPI data and bringing those to you at those times. We can always adjust and kind of rearrange as needed.
So I do like this rhythm. The next step where we actually look at student outcomes is then when we revisit the MAP and the PALS assessment, and then we'll check in at the high school level with the high school GPAs before we kind of come back around next year to the forward exams again. So I think that's going to be a really nice way of keeping the pulse on things. Mm-hmm. Thoughts or questions? Concerns? I mean, obviously, we all have room, everybody's got room for improvement in some of these things. It's nice to see that at least things are going in the direction that we want them to, so.
And we really do more in-depth analysis, whether it's teaching and learning or, even with the principals today, looking at their 3-year trend of ELA data and math data in our ongoing activities. So at some point, we can share more about that if wanted.
Maybe just I would say a question of curiosity. I mean, I've heard a little bit from our students about test fatigue. There's a lot, right? And there's always been MAP and forward. I know we're kind of adding or requiring that additional MAP time point. What is that doing with respect to teachers and time in the classroom? And what does that look or feel like? Are we getting feedback on that? I'm sure we are.
Yeah, it's real. It's real. I guess, thank you for acknowledging that, right. We do hear that from students. We try to balance, again, what the state imposes that we must do as compared to our local assessments. So it's always a push-pull balance with that. So it's always something that we're trying to attend to, but that is real. We have the new the Aspire went away, so we have the ACT Secure now that's coming for the lower grade levels, and trying to figure out what that online testing is going to be coming up for that in the next few months. So that'll be newer for that group of students. So, no, you want to add anything?
I would just add, it's an ongoing
Yeah.
conversation. I know some of the teaching learning members in the assessment and data team had looked at assessments prior to me coming. They created a matrix, so really evaluating what assessments we're using and for what. And I think there's some more conversations to be had around those topics. You know, I think when we first probably rolled out MAP assessment, there's a lot of training and professional development. And we have a lot of new teachers, and that's not on a regular professional development schedule. And so how do we get that information if we have new teachers to the system? How do we ensure that they're using the assessment to the fullest potential? So lots of more conversations to have around that. As always, we're balancing the state requirements, like said, with the new Aspire test, or the new ACT Secure test for 9th and 10th grade, but looking at system-wide, just all assessments in general, and kind of what are some next steps.
Yeah, and I'll take that opportunity, as Jen mentioned. We do have a data and assessment project team currently working on that work. And so you may be seeing over this year some recommendations in terms of our assessments. I don't know if you remember last year me saying we were going to, part of the KPI conversation around taking away MAP off of a KPI was that we had wanted to review MAP in general in this district, and so we're currently going through that process. I guess I should also forecast for you that our early literacy screener of PALS is, in essence, going away. So we need to figure out what we're going to use as early literacy screener for that as well, so.
That's new information, because we just had that conversation
That is
a few
newer
months ago.
information.
Okay.
So,
That is hot off the press
Okay.
and being communicated throughout this month.
Yeah.
But that, yep.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, just a comment or a quick one. You know, this issue has been here forever, and I haven't even been here forever. So it comes up every year. It comes up every year, and I've never, ever heard families, teachers, students ever say, hey, we are being tested at the right level of frequency. And not that isn't a valid concern, but I point it out because we work on it every year, and we try to adjust it, and it's just one of those things that I don't know if there's a perfect solution forever. We do change, there's a little bit of a pendulum, and we have had times where we've gone away from some testing, but in this day and age of being a data-driven organization, and not just organization, but world, really, it can be tough. It can be tough. So testing fatigue, it's a real thing. Yes, we need to continue to look at it, but I don't think there's a silver bullet that exists, is, I guess, my point.
Yeah, I mean, I've been one who's lobbied for that fall test, because we do need to know where the kids are starting out the school year, but obviously that adds another testing period, and we don't.
There should be great values.
Right, we don't expect there to be straight lines, right?
Yeah.
Then we need to understand what those curves look like. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Sure. Mr. Moore?
Thank you. I was just going to add that, yes, I do believe in quarterly assessments to see, where students are in fall, winter, spring. But I also think that there are different ways to assess students. And so I guess working with the teachers, like Mr. Como said, the tests are not going to go away. We know that because there are state requirements, and also we have local assessments that we need to take care of. But I think that there's also a path or avenue that we can take where we empower our teachers to, and work with them and help them understand that there are different ways to assess that they could include. For example, summative projects, summative assessments that they create on their own. And that gives a variety of students to demonstrate if they have mastered those skills or standards. Of course, at the end of the day, we're going to look at the data, but nobody ever said that that couldn't be included in the data as well. So there are multiple ways and multiple layers of how we assess students, and that's through formal assessments, informal assessments, and like I said, verbal and oral, and also there's just tons of ways you can assess students, and using those different metrics to determine if the students have mastered those skills or met proficiency. So I think that this is it's a situation where it's not a unique situation where we can't work through. We just have to be creative on how we work with the teachers and the students who are feeling burnt out. Because trust me, I'm burnt out too. So, just helping them understand that we're here to support them, and it's nothing too hard that we can't work through with them in regards to this. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Piasek. I just want to make it clear, I'm essentially the reason behind the 3 times a year MAP testing, and I just think it's a formative measure that prior to my arrival was optional. Sometimes we did it, sometimes we didn't. Schools could choose, and I think as we develop more curricular resources that you've been so good in supporting, and we can guarantee the guaranteed and viable curriculum throughout the system, perhaps that's something we can talk about, as Ms. Landers said they're already talking about. But we were a little too variable in that regard, too, with a lot of self-curation of materials. So I thought at least gave us an opportunity 3 times a year to get a formative dipstick on where kids were at. And as we continue to progress with resources, perhaps we can revisit it, too. I certainly think we should be open to that.
I think given where we were a couple years ago and just some of the realization we've had, it really helps a lot to have the data. And, the intent is obviously not to put the burden on the students and the teachers, but it also helps us kind of create those business cases for what resources we need and what platforms make the most sense for us. So I do appreciate the effort that goes into that. Any other comments or questions? All right, well, are there any recommendations first of all, Jenna, thank you very much. What else would you want to add?
I just want to add my 3 follow-up pieces. I am going to double check on the ACT on your question just to verify. I'll provide the slide for everyone. My apologies about that. And if there's anything else, just let me know.
Thank you, Jen. I went too fast. I apologize for that, but thank you for all of your work on this. Yes, Mrs. Landish.
I just want to preview before you get to recommendations. I do want to preview because there was a quite extensive list last month. I wanted to let you know when a few updates were going to happen. In January, on January 3rd, we will have a gifted and talented update on January 3rd. We'll also have an art update on January 3rd, and then we're scheduled to have our music update on February 7th. So all those things were in the hopper. There was a few things around the apps and the common school funding that were, I think, more time sensitive, but we had flexibility with some of the others, and so we're spacing them out accordingly.
Wonderful. Thank you. I should probably say that we have no capacity for future committee topics. But is there anything that anyone would like to raise for future discussion? There's some stare downs happening over here. Anything else? All right. Seeing nothing, well, thank you everyone for, I think, a very productive meeting. We covered a lot of different topics and a lot of ground tonight, so great work by everybody. Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Have a good night.